their insights, and there's plenty of food for thought there going forward. We heard earlier from the Premier and talking about the fact that amenity's not a nice to have anymore, it's a must have in terms of building the community in Western Sydney. And we're going to continue on that theme now with our next panel. So without further ado, if they could start making their way up, please. I can see a couple of them moving already. This is Bridging the Blue and Green Gap, talking about green space and access to recreation and water in particular. And our panellists are Roch, Cheroux, the Managing Director of Sydney Water, Suellen Fitzgerald, the Chief Executive of Greater Sydney Parklands, Alex O'Mara, Deputy Secretary, Place, Design and Public Spaces at DPI, Jacqueline Vozzo, the CEO of Penrith Lakes, and our Provocateur, Rebecca Davis, is the Director of Advisory, Engagement and Digital at WSP. Please welcome our panel.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I am absolutely thrilled to be Provocateur for such an illustrious panel. And what an amazing opportunity to have a conversation about bridging the blue-green divide based on the introduction that we've had this morning. Once upon a time, green space, parklands and waterways were nice to have, beautiful things to take photos in front of during election time. But today it is now the foundation of the economic boom opportunity of Western Sydney. It is something that is the driver of attracting and retaining talent, which leads to investment, which leads to all of the economic activity that we're really looking forward to. So I'd like to get the panel perhaps to just quickly introduce themselves first of all, so maybe starting with you, Alex. And in your introduction, if you wouldn't mind telling us, why does this matter to you? Why is it important we get this right?
Sure. So I'm Alex O'Mara. I have the privilege to lead the Place Design and Public Spaces team in the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. And essentially our team is about delivering great places and public spaces across New South Wales and all the things that involves. So leveraging the planning system, funding infrastructure, but also green space, green infrastructure, design, and we also have the opportunity to look after some of our most precious places like Greater Sydney Parklands, which Suellen leads, the Botanic Gardens and Placemaking New South Wales. And it was absolutely fantastic to hear the Premier talking about the importance of those things today. I think COVID, if you look globally, cities around the world recognising how important public space is to connecting communities. And we've kind of known that, but I think lockdown gave us pause for thought around that. And I suppose climate change is the other thing that's really making us think about why it's absolutely critical for our cities to be more resilient, more sustainable. And, you know, in some ways the government a couple of years ago announcing those two key priorities around greening the city and greener public spaces, which are essentially about, you know, better equity in terms of access to quality public space, have given us the opportunity to start some of that work. And I think there's been some great stuff happening over the last couple of years, but we know there's so much more to do to really unlock the potential of Western Sydney.
Over to you, Roch.
Thank you. Well, look, very simply at Sydney Water, we've got a vision which is to create a better life for our customers and communities, and the usage of creating a better life for us. What does it mean exactly? We've been doing water and wastewater services for about 130 years, but 2 years ago, when we set this new vision for the business, that was a clear recognition that actually water is a lot more than just drinking water and just wastewater services. And if you think about water and the very natural water cycle, then you get an idea of what we mean. We mean that actually water is a lot more than this. And then you start thinking about stormwater, and you start thinking about waterways, and you start thinking about recycled water. And then you connect the fact that actually water in nature is a natural cycle. And in modern civilized societies, we've been very good at separating this. And the consequence is that today we've got stormwater running on the streets, cleaning the streets, and ending up in waterways and polluting waterways. Is it what we want? Not really. And we've got cities where we don't have enough trees, we don't have enough cool place where people can walk and enjoy their time. And that's really the role that we want to have, collaborating with all the government organization, the local government as well, to make the cities a more livable, a more thriving places where people will really enjoy their lives because they've got access to parks and gardens. There is a tree canopy that is protecting from heat island effects. There is access to swimming spots on the rivers instead of having to drive to the east to access to the beach. And all this is possible only if we manage water in an integrated fashion. So that's really the importance of water in the city. It's not only about drinking water and wastewater services. It's very much about the role that water has in any environment where people live.
Thanks, Roch. Over to you, Suellen.
Thanks, thank you. It's very interesting to hear Roch talk because my thought to add to that is that water is vital for parks as well too. So you go to the stormwater, you go to the waterways, you go to the catchments, and inevitably you go to the parks. I'm very privileged to be the inaugural Chief Executive of Greater Sydney Parklands. This is a new organisation the government has brought together over the last 12 months, although the parks we manage are extremely old. We manage Parramatta Park, which has been delivering wonderful services to the community for 160 years now. We also manage Centennial Park in the eastern suburbs, Callan Park, 38 hectares of Callan Park in Rozelle, Western Sydney Parklands, which I'm particularly proud of, and also to the 400 hectares of the beautiful Fernhill Estate at Mulgoa. The reason why this new organisation has been brought together is the realisation that these parks in themselves are wonderful resources, and we've seen that over COVID with a bare minimum increase in visitation of 20% each of the 2 years of COVID that we've been through. But the real value add now is how to link these parks into a network across the city. Because it's one thing to have parks, but the critical thing is people can get to them and can get to them in an easy, cool way and that they lead from one place to another. All the research shows that walking tracks and walking loops are the key things people want to do in the outdoors. So it makes sense to establish an organisation that will not only look after these wonderful iconic parks right across the city, but also have a mandate to advocate for the blue-green grid. I'm really looking forward to working with Roch on that mandate, but to look outside our own boundaries and concentrate on connectivity and joining this up and connecting the people to the parks.
Thanks. And Jackie.
For far too long, Penrith Lakes has been a blob on a map that people have looked at and just questioned why it sat there. For far too long, Penrith Lakes has had access to recreational waterways in the large lake scheme which was created post-quarrying, and people have just questioned why isn't that open. The blue-green grid, and in particular in a post-COVID recovery world where nothing was magnified more than on the news when you saw people at Bondi still enjoying a COVID pandemic experience lifestyle, and then very much looking to Western Sydney and seeing the difference in the photos. Nothing was magnified more than the benefits that the Eastern Sydney got to enjoy during that pandemic time and lockdown time, and the different experience that Western Sydney was going through. And Penrith Lakes is an area in Western Sydney which can absolutely today be activated for the betterment of the Western Sydney lifestyle. From a blue-green grid perspective, with access to recreational waterways, access to open space and to parklands, but it is a land of opportunity for development also. We have a landform which will shortly be finished rehabilitation, which will see, and I'm unashamedly saying that our business plan is very much post-COVID recovery to lift off. And if we can open up the recreational waterways for primary contact swimming in, perhaps not this summer, but every other summer, which has preceded this and will probably go post this in a 40-degree hot day out at Penrith, and have local residents swimming freely and enjoying a beautiful asset in Western Sydney instead of driving 45 minutes east to have that same experience. But then also frequenting, hopefully, restaurant precincts and hotels and everything else that can come alongside these recreational waterways and these open parklands. That is a better Western Sydney, and that is something which we fundamentally believe Penrith Lakes can activate for the residents of Western Sydney.
Sounds amazing, and as a child of Penrith a long time ago, I can't imagine a life that included an amenity like that. My memory was driving up and down Northern Road and going to the Penrith Panthers Leagues Club and Little Lass in the Emu Plains, but there was nothing like Penrith Lakes when I was there in the 80s, so sounds amazing. I would like to ask the panel now to, perhaps pick up from where the last panel was talking about references both around the rest of Australia and around the world for what does great look like? Like when you think about who would you like to steal ideas from, who is really doing this well, like who are your reference points, who do you keep an eye on and make sure that we're constantly learning and updating our thinking based on what's happening either in Victoria as what the Ashley was referring to, or it might be elsewhere in Australia or elsewhere in the world. So maybe start with you, Alex, because I'm sure you've done a bit of thinking about this.
I think actually yesterday, Sydney hosted the World Urban Parks Forum, which was a great opportunity for us to be reaching out to other cities around the world about, how do they make, and I suppose this is the thing that I find really exciting, is this vision that the government's committed to around Sydney being a city within a park. And really, when you think about that's about us really committing to bringing the vision of the blue-green grid to life. So I think there's some incredible work going on across the world around how you make that work, how you integrate blue and green. Certainly Jeff Roberts, who I know you're hearing from later today, laid down the gauntlet yesterday about Prospect Reservoir and opening that up to the community. And I know Penrith Lakes, I think that's an area where a huge opportunity for us to make that available to the community. So, look, the other thing I'd mention, we haven't really talked about streets, although the Premier mentioned it, is, that the importance of high streets to connect community and also to drive local economy. So some of the programs we ran last year, like Streets as Shared Spaces, are really bringing together that idea of public space, but also, footfall for local business and some great stuff. We've been pretty inspired by what's happening in New York, for example, with their Open Streets program, where they're pretty much like here, we trialled sort of closing streets and making those streets available for the community to use. And like us, they're looking at making a lot of that permanent and having a lot of cultural activation on the street. So, I might pause there. I'm sure you have thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good ideas locally, actually. We just need to ask our people, our customers, what they would like to see, what they would like to, the sort of environment that they would like to live in, and then we get all sort of great ideas. I'll take an example. A few weeks ago, we had the Sydney Water Innovation Festival, and one of the absolutely fantastic ideas that came out of this innovation festival, so there was a number of sprints and etc. But one of the ideas that came out is called Urban Plunge, and that's how can you activate swimming spots on rivers in a very easy and I guess potentially temporary, but potentially long-term fashion. And, it's just the sort of ideas, okay, what do we need to do that? And then you get the people around the table and you get it done. So actually there's plenty of really good ideas that our customers, our Sydney Water customers are giving us almost every day when we engage with them. And that's I guess the power of engaging with the community and listening and then working on ideas.
Look, I hate to fall into the trap that Ashley fell into on the last panel and praise Victoria. But when you say what does good look like, Parks Victoria and the Melbourne Metropolitan Parks System has always been the leader in Australia. We've also looked to London as a national park city and a city that has some really interesting new initiatives, including their Open Space Commission, which has got an advocacy role, much like GSP will have going forward. But I do agree with Roch in that there's lots of great ideas locally as well. I think the key area of innovation for us is going to be inviting the community to get involved in the planning and the management and the decision making around how our parks and these blue-green grids actually evolve in the future. We've got a masterclass happening with international experts next week as part of the World Urban Congress that Alex mentioned. And this is going to bring together experts in that exact field from around the world, Canada, Toronto, South America, and Europe, to talk about new ways to get the community really involved. And I think one of the key parts of that is going to be young people as well. Obviously, children are a big constituent for our parks, but I see a gap, particularly in Western Sydney, in the engagement with young people and teenagers. One of the things I noticed over COVID lockdown was the DIY phenomena. It wasn't just a Bunnings phenomena, it was happening in parks. I saw people put up pop-up art galleries in their local open space, and we had kids coming to our parks on their BMX bikes with a shovel on their back and building their own BMX tracks in the park, which was rather a shock. But I think this way a way to empower people and young people into parks is something that we'd like to become the best in the business at.
And just with the Penrith Lakes focused hat on, obviously lakes and beaches or a lake beach is not really something that we have in Sydney. So we sort of look to Europe for inspiration there, and obviously talk with my colleagues in terms of the innovation that we can bring to the parkland. But very selfishly, from a Penrith Lakes point of view, good looks like activated and open.
Yeah, it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, and we've kind of heard a couple of answers a little bit there, but around the impact and the learnings of lockdowns. We don't know how long this period, we kind of thought it was over, but maybe it's not. Were there any surprises, anything that has been interesting nuggets out of lockdown? We don't need to have everyone answer this, but if anybody has any specific things that they have been surprised to see out of the lockdown that has real scalability or opportunity to take it forward?
Well, I would say we took the opportunity to do a community survey in the first lockdown, and then we repeated it this year, and we put all of that free online. But what we found was, and the community told us, things like 59% of them were walking more, 27% of them were cycling more. So, I think we kind of knew that, but it's great to have the data. The other thing I think we know from surveys we've been doing in relation to the design and play set, which is about to go on exhibition, is that, for example, residents in Western Sydney are least satisfied with their access to open green space, and they link those more to wellbeing than other areas. So, that sort of focus, not just on program funding and opening new parks will get you some of the way, but thinking about how you design your places so they're walkable, there's canopy, you're actually addressing the urban heat island effect. I think that's where we need to be thinking, because we know that Western Sydney is going to be about 8 to 11 degrees hotter than other parts of the city. And, actually one of the things I was thinking about was that, around the world, people talking about shade and heat as an equity issue. in Greece, in LA. You know, I think that's very much an issue for Australia, and we need to be absolutely on the front foot with that.
Absolutely, finding every opportunity to put in more trees down the middle of streets and the edge of streets, yeah.
Yeah, very, very aligned feedback to what Alex just described. I think on the trees, we published a document about a year ago that was basically demonstrating that with the right tree canopies and using stormwater and recycled water in the city, you can actually reduce the heat island effect by something like between 4 and 5 degrees.
Yeah, amazing.
So this is really important. I think one of the other lessons, and that's the image of Bondi and Western Sydney, and it's clear that people want more access to swimmable rivers and lakes and places where they can really enjoy the hot summer days without having to travel to the east.
Absolutely. And I might ask you a different question, Suellen, unless you've got something specific to...
No, please go ahead.
I wanted to ask you, how do you think we're going? So we've sort of talked about some feedback, the level of ambition and the huge amount of focus and motivation that you can hear in this morning's conversations. Are we on track? Are we progressing well? Are we building momentum? And if you combine that with what are you most proud of over the last little while, what are some of the iconic projects that are really showing that we're making that sort of progress happen?
I think it's fair to say that we are on track, but there's so much more to do. One of the issues around access to open space and waterways in Sydney is that actually there is a lot of parkland that has been set aside, but the problem, and we've talked about it this morning, is how well the facilities allow for activation of that land. So I think we've done well in setting aside the supply in terms of public open space, but I think we have to do a lot better in activating it and embellishing it. And as I said before, the real value add for us now is linking one space to another, to another, to another, whether that be through the street network, as Alex mentioned, or through waterways and corridors. That's where I think we can really accelerate the community benefits that come out of what we're doing. It goes without saying that the project that I've been working with Alex on for the last 2 years to put the Greater Sydney Parklands as a new agency together, I think this is a great initiative for being able to bump into the future by taking us well beyond the traditional park management structures of trusts and into a citywide, and in fact Sydney's first citywide urban parks agency. So I think this is a real springboard for that connectivity piece. I also think that there are some great partnerships happening now with local councils in Western Sydney. Alex's team is working with a lot of local governments in Western Sydney on park projects, and I'm very proud of our partnership project with Liverpool Council. I know Eddie Jackson is speaking later on the program, and he may be here. We've partnered financially with them on building one of the Southern Hemisphere's biggest mountain bike and BMX facilities in the Cecil Hills part of Western Sydney Parklands. And I can't wait, because I'll be able to direct those kids on BMXs with shovels to a brand new facility rather than digging up the park. Partnerships are really happening, and I've had a lot of positive feedback from our touchpoint councils who also want to get involved in those kind of partnerships.
Great, thank you. Jackie, is there anything that you're particularly proud of or see as great signs of progress?
I think one of the best signs of progress in the sort of post-COVID world is that this government has responded with this West Invest Fund, and I see that as a massive opportunity in Western Sydney and for private sector to couple with government and move forward on really activating a lot of these open spaces and recreational waterways in a really accelerated time frame. So I think it's, we live through hardship, but out of that hardship has come something quite phenomenal for Western Sydney, which is investment into these spaces, which I think is a huge step forward.
Can I mention a few projects as well that are really, demonstrating that things are changing? So, in terms of parks, we're working with Penrith and Liverpool councils on how we can install smart irrigation in parks and gardens and give an application to people to check where it is cool to go in summer, which is, a different approach where people can see that the water in a park, keeping a park green will make a big difference. Another example is what we're doing with Western Sydney Airport, where an airport is obviously a huge green area, but when there is no water in summer, it turns brown, and that's not really good in terms of temperature, and especially air temperature. And this has an impact on the community living around the airport. It also has an impact in terms of environment, because then the planes need more fuel to take off, and you need more energy to cool the terminal buildings, and et cetera, et cetera. So the partnership that we've got with Western Sydney Airport is about how can we use storm water and recycled water to keep the airport green and then cool the temperature around the airport. And that's a completely different approach of what you can do with water in a living environment. So there's actually a lot of projects that are ongoing, and I'm not talking about all the infrastructure projects that are in the background that are, yes, going to provide the water that we need.
Absolutely. Yeah. Got a slight issue with tree heights and birds, I understand, but that little detail can be worked through, I'm sure. Alex?
Yeah, look, I would say, I agree, West Invest, huge opportunity, and great to see that level of commitment from government, but I also think over $500 million committed in the last 2 years to public space, and we've really pivoted from, obviously still investing in big things, but lots of money on smaller things too. So things like, everyone can play your high street, so everyone can play in Campbelltown, your high street funding, Lakemba Ramadan Lights, for example, Places to Love partnerships with Bankstown, Liverpool, Penrith. Through Festival of Place, we funded the Fun Park Festival at Mount Druitt. So, lots of ways. And I think one of the great things over the past couple of years has been the partnerships with the local government to really look at, how can we support activation of their local places. And a big focus on greening the city. So, both government priorities around greening the city and greener public spaces ahead of target. But things like, one of my favourite programs is Cooling the Schools, where we partner with education and Western Sydney University guiding that program to get kids planting trees in their schools. A great collaboration with councils in the last couple of months around greener neighbourhoods. How do we support councils to co-design tree canopy programs, which we fund through Greening the City grants, and then things like green innovation grants, where we're looking at, how do you invest in new ways of creating canopy and water-sensitive urban design. So with that one, for example, Blacktown are being funded to do green roofs on their showground. We did a great collaboration with Campbelltown Council on a Rose Meadow demonstration project, because we know that's one of the hottest parts of Sydney. And again, with the university, how do we think about where we plant trees in different places, to create a greener city. And then, the big things like the Cumberland Plain Conservation Plan. The first time we've done a strategic assessment of biodiversity of that scale, 200,000 hectares. And that's both enabling the aerotropolis, but also delivering a much better biodiversity outcome. So that one's with both Ministers for the Environment. So I think there's a lot to be hopeful about, but I also think huge opportunity to do so much more.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask, you've talked a bit about some of the iconic projects, large and the smaller ones as well. Are we doing enough through the systemic little things, so creating either planning rules or procurement mandates attached to some of our big infrastructure projects that systemically encourage the right types of patterns of behaviour around, whether it's tree canopy or water preservation or other topics like that?
Well, look, it was great to hear Chris talk about putting the benefit back into cost-benefit analysis, and I'm looking at the Productivity Commissioner. I mean, we've been doing a great piece of work this year with Treasury on a new cost-benefit analysis framework for green infrastructure and public space that we're hoping to pilot or roll out next year, because I think we're all conscious that we need to find better ways to value that infrastructure so that, we're treating it as we're looking at it as something as valuable as roads and rail, which I think we are recognising that it is. I think the second big thing from my perspective is the design and place state policy, which will be going out on exhibition soon. So things in that, like a draft urban design guide that's really looking at, what kind of communities do we want to be creating, healthy and sustainable communities with canopy and public open space. And it would be great to get people's feedback on that, because that's a really interesting conversation for our community to be having at the moment. What's the right balance between, development feasibility over the short term and the long-term costs of not doing these things? And I suppose the other thing is, thinking about the land use planning system and the precinct plans that are being developed at the moment. So great work on the Aerotropolis with Sydney Water and looking at, how can we deliver a regional stormwater approach, for example, in that work, again, happening at the Aerotropolis, where the department and a number of state agencies are working with the Western Sydney Planning Partnership, 9 councils, and Sarah's Western Parklands City Authority, all thinking about, how do we co-design this new place? And one that's dear to my heart, the Wilton DCP, which I don't know if you saw, but it was profiled on the World Economic Forum website a couple of weeks ago during COP26. And with that one really targeting things like not having dark roofs in Western Sydney, a 40% canopy target, and using water-sensitive urban design. So I think we need to be thinking about all the levers we have. Funding, yes, but also what are the policy and kind of planning levers we can be pulling to get the right kind of outcomes.
Outstanding. Okay, I've got one final question for each of you. I'm going to start with Jackie. Santa's coming soon. What's the one thing that you'd like to ask Santa for in order to turbocharge the blue-green grid?
To be honest, I think the answer to that question has almost already been given, which is sort of the West Invest Fund. The one thing we're all waiting for is very much the guidelines. So I'd like the guidelines to that sooner rather than later. Less on the detail and more on the concept. And look, it's a hard one, because you want to make sure that the recipients of that funding really do have a well thought out, concept idea for the betterment of Western Sydney. So that's a very hard question to answer, because from a private sector point of view, you'd want to see less rather than more, but you need to make sure that the balance is right. So, perhaps those guidelines could come out, though, on the 6th of January to at least give us Christmas, but I believe they're coming out pre-Christmas.
Excellent, thank you. Suellen.
I hope Santa brings us all a wonderful holiday, because I know that
everyone needs it.
Everybody needs it. It's been a long, hard year. But in terms of the blue-green grid, what I'd like Santa to have in his sack for us is willing partners who are really keen to do blue sky thinking. I think we've got the opportunity, as others have said, with the West Invest funding. We've also got a huge piece of preparatory work that Alex and her team have been doing. We've got a new parks agency for Sydney. Now it's about collaboration with willing partners on really innovative ideas.
What would you like?
Something like bringing Christmas 23 or 24, 25. So a leap forward, because there's so many things happening, and there's so much energy in this room today, but in all the organisation in general working in Western Sydney. I'm really keen to see what the outcome will be in 2 or 3 years. There's a lot of projects ongoing. There's a lot of good ideas. The framework is almost in place. There is money available. There is a lot of goodwill from public and private partners to make it happen. So I'm really keen actually to be in 25 or 26 and to see it real.
You want a crystal ball so you can see what we end up with. Lovely. And Alex?
Yeah, I think I agree with Suellen. I feel like we sort of have this window of opportunity to really deliver something transformational, and you know, the best places are built through collaboration, and that was for me one of the greatest things about COVID, was it really brought us together. And my perspective from state government was that, you know, we were collaborating with local government and industry in a way that we hadn't before. And with community as well. We really in our group try and put the community at the centre of everything we do. So, I mean, I sort of hear Jackie's challenge about not wasting the opportunity, and we certainly heard that from Chris as well. You know, how do we make sure we're having the right conversation so we genuinely have a shared vision that kind of drills down from West Invest to actually what would make the biggest difference, and then working together to make sure we deliver on that.
Outstanding. Well, I hope you all get your presents delivered. Thank you to our panel. Oh. If everyone put your hands together and thank our panellists, Jackie, Suellen, Roch and Alex.